Now back to Richard White, who writes, the Chinese rush to high-speed rail is not working out as well as it might. It's been plagued by technical problems, cost overruns, corruption, low ridership, and high fares. Only 2 high-speed systems, Tokyo to Osaka and Paris to Lyon, neither of them comparable to the California route, actually turn a profit.
2 high-speed systems in the entire world.
That's correct.
And 2 fairly short runs. I mean, Paris to Lyon is not that far. It's not as complex as the California. California, France isn't as big. California is also much more spread out, and you've got the terrain. I mean, you've got all these mountains that you have to carve through somehow or go over. I mean, this is ridiculous. The what's the other part I wanted to read here? Richard White. What Richard White writes is that when they're telling you the California system turns a profit, what's the definition of a profit? A profit means you repay the cost of building the system, the interest on the money borrowed to build it, and then you gain some extra money besides. A profit is necessary if you're going to attract private capital. This report skirts the issue of capital costs, the costs of investment and interest. In other words, what they define as a profit is, on an operating basis from year to year, they claim they'll make a few dollars. But that's not profit. You have to include the $180 billion that you spent on the damn thing, not to mention all the interest on the borrowed money. That's the definition of real profit. You can't just flush the $180 billion down the drain and then go, well, we're making about $2 or $3 million a year on this thing.
Now, the trick about profit, which we'll talk about when we come back, is, of course, based on ridership estimates and fare estimates, which, honestly, this high-speed rail board just pulled this stuff out of there you-know-where. Because when we come back, there is one unbelievable statistic they're trying to sell to us, which compares their ridership estimates for people boarding in Merced and comparing it to Penn Station in New York City. We'll talk about it next.
John and Ken Show. KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk radio.
I was still talking about the high-speed rail because every day we find out more about the horrible, atrocious numbers that the High-Speed Rail Authority and their latest business plan are giving us. To quickly recap, they originally told us it would be $34 billion to build this high-speed rail line from San Francisco all the way down to L.A. And now, of course, they're telling us it's $100 billion. But we found out on Friday, well, you better add another $19 billion to that. So now it's over $117 billion. But apparently this isn't the phase that includes Sacramento and San Diego. So if you add that in, the cost could go upwards of $180 billion for this rail line.
$180 billion. And so far we have $3 billion from the federal government for high-speed rail, another $3 billion in stimulus funds. And then there's $9 billion that we agreed to borrow. So they've got a total of $15 billion on hand for a project that needs $180 billion, and there are no private investors offering a dime. Nothing.
Now, we mentioned in the last segment that the high-speed rail likes to talk about profit because we told you the other day that right now the plan is for 20% to come from private investors and 80% to come from you, the taxpayers, in some form of borrowing. But, they say the whole thing's going to turn a profit. Everybody will be paid back. Everything will be fine. Don't worry about it. Well, originally it was going to be 80% from investors and only 20% from taxpayers. But we've already covered that. Let's just talk about whether or not this thing can turn a profit. And now we've been talking about Richard White, a professor of history at Stanford and the author of a book about the history of railroads. We tried to get him on the show, but he was traveling today. But he said, let's talk about the ridership numbers. Because apparently the high-speed rail board has now come up with a ridership estimate for this thing from 28.6 million to 37.1 million. White writes, admittedly, that appears realistic compared with the 90 million that they once promised.
90 million. So it was $34 billion. It was going to be done in 8 years, and it was going to get 90 million passengers. Now the new numbers are $180 billion. It's going to take 3 times as long to build, over 20 years, and the ridership is not 90 million, it's 1/3 of that.
he says suspiciously that number is not far from the 39 million riders they projected in 2009 because apparently their model does not turn a profit if they fall too far from that $39 million projected number. So they're trying to stay close to it. In other words, they're just fudging the numbers.
They're making stuff up.
So this looks like it works. And he goes, but these kinds of projects always overestimate their ridership. Actual ridership of the BART line to San Francisco's airport, for example, was in 2009 only 25% of the prediction back in 2003.
Yeah, let's stop right there and look at that. Because it's like, oh, it's the BART line to the airport, right?
That's just an extension they did.
Right. But what they quadrupled. Their prediction was 4 times what the reality was. People who get behind these public transportation projects are always given too much credibility because they're pushing something noble. It's public transit. Why, it's a light rail line. It's a subway. It's a high-speed rail. And we're all supposed to feel guilty that we're driving cars and burning gas and oil, right? So whenever you have somebody on television who represents rail and mass transit, they're given too much respect and too much credibility. Most of these people are con artists, scam artists. How could you have the BART train to the airport only giving you 25% of the projected business?
Well, I think the next sentence is even more telling. If California's high-speed rail captured the same percentage of riders as Amtrak's Acela does today, that's the Northeast Corridor.
Goes from Boston to New York to Washington.
Washington, right.
It's a faster train than the ordinary Amtrak train.
Well, this is an area, he says, with a long tradition of rail travel and a population higher than California. If you used that projection onto California, you'd come out with 5 million riders in California. That's way below the 28 million to 37 million that they put in there. And the Orange County Register has a couple of reporters who found out something even better. The business plan that the high-speed rail put out predicts that in the year 2030, 14,400 passengers a day will board southbound bullet trains in Merced. That's more than the daily departures last year from the busiest Amtrak depot in the United States, Penn Station in New York. So we're comparing Penn Station to Merced. Does that not completely fall apart?
Right. So what are they saying? 14,000 people every day leaving Merced?
That's correct.
There's only 78,000 people who live in Merced.
Then where are the rest coming from?
I don't know.
That's assuming that 1/5 of the population will jump on the high.
20% of Merced's population every day will board a train to Bakersfield.
Really?
That's what they're saying. Merced itself, I have the thing here, is only 23 square miles. It's 78,000 people. And then I'm looking to see, well, if you go to Merced, what would you go see? And Merced has a UC campus, and they have a zoo, and they have bike trails and a skate park. They have 2 first-run movie theaters. They have a Target, a Sears, a JCPenney, and a Kohl's, a Best Buy, a Barnes & Noble, a Lowe's, and a Walmart, and several restaurants.
It's shopper's heaven.
You tell me 14,000 people are going to be going to Merced to see the 2 movie theaters and pick up a few things at Target and Sears? What is this?
Well, it's the only place to go for quite a few miles.
What this is they're hell-bent on building anything to, quote, create jobs, claim victory, and say, look, we help the economy. They're out there working on a high-speed rail, and they're not worried about 20 years from now when this really blows up. They don't care.
There was a book.
Like you said the other day, their friends will get contracts. Obama will look good in the news, and maybe Jerry Brown, too, because some people are working in the Central Valley, which has some of the worst unemployment rates in the state.
You want to hear something else funny about Merced? There was a book written a few years ago called Cities Ranked and Rated. They judged the quality of life, cost of living, availability of jobs, education, healthcare, climate, crime, the whole thing, right? You know where Merced ranked out of 373 cities? 370th.
Oh, God.
It's the 4th worst city to live in the United States.
Well, that's why they'll be getting on the trains to leave.
Well, in 5 days, everybody will be gone.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. But they don't care about 5 days. It's the first day when 14,000 people get on the southbound trains, they'll claim victory.